us and to hear from our student researchers about their work. Kat Smith, Sarah Wallace, Blair Watts, and Matteo Fratracangeli are the 4 students out of our 11 SURP students this summer who are here to represent our program. SURP is sponsored this year through the Chancellor's Office, the Provost's Office, the Deans and the colleges, the Rapid Center, the Center for the Study of Free Enterprise, as well as the North Carolina Biotech and other private funding. So it literally takes a village to put this program together. While I have the privilege of helping to facilitate this, the program is led out of the Provost's Office and directed by Clue Hansen. Clue, thank you. She is our coordinator of undergraduate research at Western Carolina. She has worked so hard all summer with these students, and she has organized today's meeting, so thank you, Clue. Our SURP students' journey began with a research proposal that was submitted way back in another time, January and February. And then they had to work to modify those research plans in March and April to move to an online format. And I'm sure you are aware that many research programs around the state and across the country decided to close their research programs for the summer. So the fact that our students and faculty decided to pivot to this new challenge, I think is quite remarkable. And I'm so happy they did because we have had such a great time this summer. They are now wrapping up after 8 weeks of work. And today each one will give a brief overview of their work and they will introduce themselves. At around 1:20, we'll have time for discussion and Q&A. So at this time, I want to remind all of our participants to mute their microphones as we start with our first student, Kat Smith.
How widespread the issue of sexual assault is, particularly for women. While factors such as drinking or Greek affiliation have been identified as risk factors for the sexual victimization of college women, this research explores how background factors may also influence risk. My name is Kat Smith, and as a member of SURP, I work with my criminal justice faculty advisor, Dr. Tasha Houston, to explore how background factors, specifically primary caregiver sexual conservatism and the participants' level of emphasized femininity, play a role in risk of sexual victimization. Primary caregiver sexual conservatism may refer to the belief that sex before marriage is wrong, or the belief that a heterosexual male head of household is best. Participants' levels of emphasized femininity measured 3 components: passivity, emotional caretaking, and sexual compliance. A survey of 817 female WCU students looked at sexual victimization, which included sexual assault, attempted rape, and rape. Results displaying the significant predictors of victimization in order of importance are shown on the table presented in the results column of the slide. Separated by type of force used, 57.3% reported experiencing coercive victimization, 37% reported experiencing incapacitated victimization, and 32.3% reported experiencing forceful victimization. We found emphasized femininity and primary caregiver sexual conservatism to increase risk of victimization for coercive, incapacitated, and forceful incidents. Additionally, qualitative interviews with 10 WCU students illustrated fraternities as an area of concern for the promotion of toxic gender roles on campus, like emphasized femininity, which may explain why prior research has associated Greek life affiliation with greater risk of both sexual victimization and perpetration. In conclusion, as primary caregiver sexual conservatism and student-emphasized femininity increase risk for all types of sexual victimization, we would suggest that in addition to efforts focused on consent, that students may need help identifying risk and more specifically, feeling comfortable rejecting unwanted sexual advances. We also found that primary caregiver sexual conservatism was related to reported emphasized femininity, and we would like to study this developmental process further. Thank you.
All right. Hey, I'm Sarah Wallace, and this summer I've been working with Dr. Lamb through the Western Carolina University Summer Undergraduate Research Program, looking into the impact negative environmental events have on investors and consumers. For this project, we looked at the BP Deepwater Horizon 2010 oil spill. One main focus of our research was to understand the investor response from the spill through looking at historical stock market data for BP that we accessed through Yahoo Finance. The other focus was to create an understanding of consumer perception of corporate social responsibility through conducting a consumer survey. From the stock data, we focused on the adjusted close price and trade volume. What we found from looking at this was that there was not really a big effect on trade price or volume until events like the president addressing the disaster or government actions towards the disaster occurred. Those events seemed to really influence that day's trade or the next trading day's activities. Like if you guys look at point 4 on figure 1, that was the day after Obama went on an NBC show and said that he would sack the executive of BP if he had worked for BP. The consumer survey was really cool because although many survey takers said that they are very concerned about what corporations do socially and environmentally, when asked if they would change their buying habits because a company did some negative social or environmental activities, the responses showed they were less likely to change their habits, even though they put a lot of emphasis on corporate social responsibility. Another interesting thing we found from the survey was that for most of the responses, it seems like BP has recovered its brand reputation from the negative connotations of the spill. I really enjoyed working on this project, and I am grateful to Dr. Lamb and the SURP program for giving me this opportunity and support.
Since 2007, over 1,400 human trafficking cases have been identified in North Carolina alone. In many of these cases, the police were contacted at some point in order to help look into the case. My name is Blair Watts, and I am working with Dr. Bethany Davidson to research how prevention training programs can combat communication barriers between human trafficking victims and law enforcement officers. Our first goal was to identify significant communication barriers between law enforcement and human trafficking victims in North Carolina. A barrier is an issue that either a victim, officer, or both are facing that makes it harder to receive or provide help. Our second goal was to identify the human trafficking prevention programs currently available in North Carolina. A prevention program consists of methods that seek to reduce problems, protect the current state of well-being, or promote desired outcomes. Finally, our last goal was to identify the level and source of human trafficking knowledge for North Carolina law enforcement officers. Prevention programs are a less complex way of preventing trafficking compared to other methods such as having new laws approved. Figure 1 shows how officers first learned of trafficking with training and conferences, which qualify as prevention programs, coming in second place. A literature review identified lack of trust, lack of adequate resources or services, and cultural or language differences to be the most significant communication barriers between human trafficking victims and law enforcement. Figure 2 shows how many times each barrier was identified throughout the literature review. 18 prevention programs in North Carolina were identified, majority of which seek to educate officers on what trafficking is, but do not target any of these significant barriers. Our pilot survey that was distributed to law enforcement officers throughout North Carolina showed that while all participants believed that law enforcement had an important role in preventing human trafficking, only 50% of officers have received any human trafficking prevention training. In the future, we will revise our pilot survey, relaunch it, and begin working towards publication. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matteo Arcangeli, and this summer I teamed up with Dr. De Silva to do a research project focused on studying the luminescent properties of europium metal-based nanoprobes for potential biomedical imaging. Current cancer imaging technologies rely on expensive instruments and require high-power lasers or radioactive probes to detect cancer cells. Development of luminescent particles based on europium metal could reinvent the way that cancer is diagnosed, as it will allow a doctor to image cancer cells using low-power radiations, as we can see in figure 1. These low-power radiations consist of UV, visible, or infrared light. Our focus is to study the energy levels of the nanoprobes so that the particle with higher luminescence can be identified, thus helping with the design of efficient cancer imaging nanoprobes. Figure 2b is a prototype that I made in the lab before the lockdown, and if we were to zoom in, we would be able to see figure 3 that we obtained using our software. The europium atom is in the right in green and is responsible for the glowing, while on the left we see an organic molecule, the so-called ligand, that is responsible for the intensity of the glow. This is also the part of the probe that can be changed. We optimized the 3D structures to make them resemble more accurately the real molecule, and we calculated their energy levels. We discovered that each ligand has its own energy levels, and that there is an optimal level for which the glowing is more intense. Also, we noticed that when getting farther away from those optimal levels, the glowing intensity decreases. In conclusion, we were able to correlate the luminescent efficiency of the probes with the energy levels of the ligands. Future work includes simulating nanoprobes with different ligands and making the static particles in our chemistry lab to carry out preliminary imaging studies using live human cells. Thank you.
That was amazing. All of you. You met the 2-minute thesis dissertation presentation. I think some of you have seen those, where there's a 3-minute thesis or a 3-minute dissertation, and you've done it quite well. And as I think many of the researchers in the room know, sometimes if you can explain your work to your grandmother, then you've got a pretty good job of doing it. I would say the majority of you have done a really good job of explaining your research, as complex as it is in many ways, to your grandmother. And so trust me, in all of your areas, I'm not familiar with it all. And although I'm not your grandmother, I do understand some of it. So I think that's amazing. Is this a time that I can ask some questions, Jill, or anybody else can ask questions, even the other professors of other students and stuff?
Yes, we are open for discussion.
Because this reminds me, I think last year we did this over in Brown Hall. Did we not? Did we not have these on posters? And so that's
right.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that clue. Thank you. Well, I'm just going to kind of go through them. I wrote down some questions and stuff. Kat, is that right? Kat? You know, as you were looking at your research and you did both a quantitative and a qualitative, can you talk to me about the value of a mixed method approach to the work that you did, both a quantitative and a qualitative?
So with such a sensitive topic, it's kind of hard to get the data that we were really looking for just from something like a survey. Because with a survey, it's very clear. It's like you kind of check this box, you put the slider here, you say yes or no. But with a qualitative, with the interviews, I personally could get more personal with the students on campus, and they could give me a little bit more information than we could get. And what was particularly helpful about the interviews to me is I got the real life opinions of real life students on how they view that we can fix kind of these problems that we're finding in the survey. So it's useful in getting outside opinions and kind of elaborating on stuff that we can't cover in the survey.
Did you actually do the qualitative, the surveys, the interviews after you had gotten the data, and so you knew some of the data to follow up on, or did you do them kind of simultaneously?
A little bit of both. I began doing the interviews before we had finished data collection, but we also had kind of a preliminary look at the data kind of halfway through the interviews. And we actually, the data we did find kind of coordinated with what we were asking in the interviews, so it actually worked out really well.
And just another question, was there any, were any of the interviewees someone who also filled out the survey, or were they completely kind of separate groups? So the 10 interviewees, they did not fill out the survey?
Well, the interviews were confidential, and the survey was anonymous, so I can't say for certain who did what. However, with that being said, the interviews were, some of them were male and some of them were female, and with the surveys, we only looked at the responses of female respondents. So it's possible and it's highly likely that if they did the interview, they did the survey, but I can't know for certain.
Okay. And so you mentioned fraternities is one of your main concerns. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that. I'll go around and ask some more questions, but in my work as a social scientist and behavioral scientist, the qualitative and quantitative are so important together because you can do exactly what you've said. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Of course. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to Dr. Houston or myself, and we'd be happy to answer them or elaborate on anything.
Absolutely. Does anybody else have any questions for Kat right now?
I have a quick question for Kat. It is interesting that you note that the fraternities can be a focal point. Is there anything that you found in your research that might indicate ways that we could counteract that effect? The fraternities and sororities, Greek life, serve an important role on campus as well, but is there a way that we can do some renorming or sort of public health campaigns that might be targeted in that area that may have come out of your research?
Well, yeah, actually, a lot of the interviews, and one of the questions I asked was like, what ways do you think campus should address these issues, and what can we do, and how can we fix this? And a lot of people said it's helpful to discuss it and just have awareness about these topics, because most of them had never heard of these issues before. Like the emphasized femininity and hegemonic masculinity, which is just the flip side. It's kind of the toxic gender roles for males. But they all, after the interview, were like, yeah, these totally have some kind of relationship with sexual assault and harassment on campus. And all talk about it. And I think, and Dr. Houston can kind of agree, I think, on this. We think that it's possible that people have a problem identifying and responding to risk of victimization. So sometimes somebody may find themselves in a situation where they're at risk of being victimized and they don't know how to say no or reject to the sexual advances. And the fraternity life with parties and kind of group gatherings like that may facilitate those kind of interactions, if that makes sense. So kind of raise awareness on how to be more, say no to unwanted sexual advances, and just raise awareness in general about these issues and how they may lead to sexual assault or harassment.
Great, thanks, Kat.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, you know, what we were kind of talking about as this all came together was just, you know, how in the world, you know, like people are kind of socialized in one way, and then they get to college, and perhaps people are not prepared to have those types of adult interactions, and maybe just be a little bit naive towards those things. And so, you know, there's been this big push towards like consent, and you know, and it's not that necessarily people don't understand where there is consent or where there's not. It seems like there's a lot of people who report having experiences that might not qualify as being actual like crimes. So people who say that they did have a sexual encounter with someone that they didn't want, but it wasn't because the person forced them to do it. It was because they kept, you know, like persisting and coercing them, and or saying, you know, if you don't do this, you know, I thought you were a different type of person, you know, just that type of coercion that that women might experience that sort of pressures them into those encounters. And so, you know, like Kat mentioned, just programming that helps women in particular learn how to be comfortable, you know, speaking up for what they want and saying no. Because I mean, the reality is that even in 2020, you know, we kind of socialize women to be compliant, to be a little bit passive, and that might have some negative consequences for them in terms of those sexual experiences when they come to college.
Any other questions for Kat? That was good. Well, thank you. Sarah, so my question is somewhat related to the work that you were doing, Sarah. And you know, you talked about corporate social responsibility, CSR, and the work that you did in looking at some data around the BP oil spill and stuff, and that consumers, they appreciate, I think, particularly young consumers, if I got it correctly, they value, or they place an importance on corporate social responsibility, but yet there didn't seem to make any change with the BP oil thing. If I think I read, is that what your data is suggesting?
Yes, it is. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever, the difference between the two.
So my question to you is understanding, and so you're a marketing major, so understanding corporate social responsibility, I think, will be an important thing. Is it, do you think it's the BP oil spill, and that's so far away and it didn't really impact me, but yet when there's a Starbucks or a Chick-fil-A or the kinds of things that are that I can touch and feel, that I know that corporate social responsibility has a greater impact on my consumer behavior versus something that I don't really have any a personal relationship with?
Oh yeah, no, I definitely think so. And another thing is the people that we interviewed, or that took the survey, they were 10, 11, 12 whenever the BP spill happened.
Right.
So they might not have the impact that someone who was 25 and struggled to, you know, buy gas during that time, and, you know, had the conflict. So there's a big difference in that those people, they didn't really have that hands-on, like, this impacted me thing.
Right, yeah. That's that my when I first saw the title of it, I thought, oh, corporate social responsibility, because I know there've been a lot of work done in that area, and that's one reason why we see so many just in recent, when you think about some of the things that have been done, and I don't know, Dr. Lamb, if this would fit into this, but I think some of the changes that have happened with some of our national football teams and making changes with regards to names of leagues and those kind of things, to me, that feels, what little I know about corporate social responsibility, that feels a little bit like that. And so it's right there in front of us. And so I was just curious around that. So what is your thoughts on that, Sarah, about some of the things that are happening today and what Target and Nike and all these other places are doing with some of these things that are happening?
I think a part of it definitely is corporate social responsibility. I'm sorry, it's starting to rain right now. I don't know if you can hear that. But I think another thing is the brand image that they are trying to give themselves, where they stand on social, political, environmental issues. That definitely impacts what they do, even if it isn't corporate social responsibility. Different types of people can see it as corporate social responsibility.
Good. Thank you. Very relevant, I think, in this time.
Oh yeah.
That you're doing. Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Wargo, do you have any thoughts or questions?
I do, and you won't be surprised by this one, Chancellor, since marketing and communications falls under me in the org structure of the university. But my question is, how, Sarah, do you think that your findings and your research might be impacted by how these corporations, in the wake of something bad, how they pivot and then sort of start pushing messages of their responsibility and social conscience in another context to try to draw distraction, in the vein of nothing is, the idea that, a single positive antidote is worth 1,000 facts, right? So do you see an effect where corporations, they might have something bad happening over here, but hey, look at all this great stuff we're happening over here. What do you think the effect of that would be?
I think, well, for BP, since this was like the thing that we really looked at, the next year they focused a lot on their green practices and what they're going to do in the future to make sure nobody remembers that, that major spill happened. The first thing they're going to think of is, oh, BP, they did this for the environment. They helped out this, they donated this. I think that most of it is just like baby steps that, push you towards rebounding from something like that. I think that answers your question. I don't really know.
It does. I specifically recall how many social media ads and other traditional media ads started cropping up about all the wonderful things that BP was responsible for.
Oh, yeah, there's every once in a while there's another one on TV.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. I do remember that. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah, so much for your work. This is very good. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Blair, human trafficking, which is something that probably not, it happens quite regularly, and we see it a lot, of course, and it's out there, but it's kind of hidden, and so we don't see it. And so your work here with law enforcement officers, it was struck me, Blair, that your results showed, these, I think that law enforcement officers said that they should be having training, I think, if I remember correctly, but 50% of them said that I'm trying to read my words here, that they hadn't received training. Is that correct? Am I reading that correctly? So they thought that the training was important. They think it's all important, but yet 1 in 2, 50% had not received any training. What does that tell you?
I think that it shows that it's not being talked about and people aren't as knowledgeable as they think they are on it. So the purpose of my survey was kind of to identify how confident law enforcement felt in their knowledge, not to really see how much they knew, but how confident they were. And so I think that shows that they know that they have a role, but they're not confident in it and they don't know what to do.
Mhm. Were you able to, and I can't remember right now, but I know you did the survey. Are you able to figure out if you're more likely to be in a rural area versus an urban area, or you're more likely to have confidence? Were you able to tell that from the numbers that you had, or could you tell that?
No, so that is one of the things that I'm actually interested in looking into further. But as I was trying to see like how much trafficking happened in a certain location, I actually came to find that there is very limited to no research on where trafficking is happening exactly.
Really?
And that goes for like everywhere, not just North Carolina. The only paper that I could find on that was a research study that was done in the United Kingdom, and it's not even available to the public.
But I would also think that trafficking probably, it kind of moves, right? I mean, my guess is it's one of these things that because it is kind of underground, it moves a lot. So you're not going to have these spots. And my first thought was, my hypothesis might be, well, if you're in big cities, they would be more knowledgeable and they would have more the skill set to handle it. But then I think in some ways my hypothesis would be wrong, because it'd be easier to probably do trafficking in rural areas, fewer people. And so you'd want them to have that skill set. That's why I was trying to find out if there was any correlation there with that. What brought you to this issue? I mean, was there a class, something that you talked about that just said, I've got to find out more about this, because there seems to be a disconnect between what's happening in law enforcement and what's happening with human trafficking. Can you talk about the thing that sparked this research question?
Yeah, so in high school, I was in a club. It was my high school English teacher ran the club, and it was part of this company called True Justice International, and they work with human trafficking victims, trying to get victims out and everything. So that's where I first got interested in trafficking. And then I'm a communication major, so that's where the communication barriers came in. And then one semester, I actually took a class with Dr. Davidson, and we had to create our own company. And I wanted to do something with human trafficking. And my dad is a law enforcement officer. And I kind of, as I was talking about human trafficking and stuff at home, I realized that there was a disconnect between human trafficking victims and law enforcement officers. So that's how it all kind of came together.
Something simple as that. You got a great research question, right? Wonderful, wonderful. Dr. Wargo, do you have any thoughts, comments?
And I don't know, this is a question you could answer, Blair, but I just can't help but wonder if it contributes to the human trafficking issues that we have such a hodgepodge, and in some cases a pretty underground economy when it comes to immigration, both legal and illegal immigration, and thinking through how that can create a pretty robust environment for trafficking, and just your thoughts on how maybe a cleaner immigration policy for the United States might help shine some spotlights on that, because it does. I don't know if you noticed that, but at least what little I've read, and you're by far a greater expert than I am, it does seem like some of the trafficking issues can bleed over into the area of folks trying to make it into the country and then get caught up in this system. Just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I agree with that, because there's not a clear definition of what human trafficking is. And so I think there's a big issue with not knowing exactly what it is, how it can occur, and things like that. People don't know how to identify it. And we can't do that until we know what it is. So I think having cleaner policies as far as immigration goes is going to help create those finer lines when trying to figure out what human trafficking is.
Great, thanks.
Good. Wow, the last one, is it Mateo? Is
Yes.
that correct? Good, good. Well, I will tell you that this was the one I probably struggled the most with. So trying to go back to my chemistry and science classes is probably not the thing that was my strongest suit. So, but my question to you is more of a, not so much, well, it's around your research, but when you look at what you were looking at, this kind of luminescence, and you were looking at the potential for imagery for human cancer cells, are there differerences? Would it make a difference depending on the type of cancer cell that this imagery might work on? And would you have to, could it work on all cancer cells, or is there a difference there?
So the particle that we made and studied right now only focuses on the most luminescent. Once we figure that out, we can then apply other substances to it, chemically bond it to them, and those substances can target specifically cancer cells.
Okay.
This is a research that we will do in the future. We will experiment with that, but we're not there yet.
Okay, I got you. And so if I understand, it's the more luminescence it is. So remind me, remember, I'm your grandmother, okay? And this is the one I struggled with the most, okay? So Dr. De Silva, don't be laughing at me, okay? I see you there, I see you. The more luminescent it is, the more likely it is to be able to show the cancer cell. Is that correct?
Yes, the more luminescent it is, the easier it is to see. And also, the more luminescent it is, the less we need to use
Okay.
for it to show up.
I got you. Okay, so that would make it, okay, very good, very good. And so I noticed on your handout that you had, that you've got something that says unpublished data. And so are you working with your professors to help? Is this something that you plan to publish at some point in time? Is there working toward that over time? Can you talk to me a little bit about not only your future research, but is there potential for presenting this at a national conference? Obviously you're doing it here, but and even publishing it?
Yes, we're planning on publishing it. We submitted an abstract actually a couple of days ago for the Southeastern Regional Meeting of American Chemical Society that will take place this October.
Wonderful.
And we're waiting to hear from them on whether they accepted it or not.
Wonderful. Great. Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. I bet you'll get accepted.
Thank you.
Dr. Vargo, do you have any questions?
I'm like you, Chancellor. This is so far beyond me, and I've seen Dr. De Silva's great dog and pony shows on at the schools on chemistry. So I'm afraid I'm overtaxed and over extended on this one. But I do have one short question, and that is, if you can, depending on the luminescent particle, is there a way, if you can't, for lack of a better term, forgive me, but if you can't hijack into a cancer cell for some kind of treatment to kill it, is there a way to use the luminescent particle as a sort of a back door into cancer cells, that if you can use these to identify the cells and look for that luminescence, can they be sort of co-opted for sort of an offensive purpose as well?
To be honest, I don't know. I think it's possible with the right idea. Somebody would be able to do it. I know that there are other particles that have been made and are actually used that instead of europium use technetium. Which is another element. They don't glow, but they emit radiations. So we all know that radiations can be used to kill cancer cells. So it's a possibility.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Wonderful. This is great. I'd like to ask, I didn't ask, but Kat, what year are you?
I'm starting my second year in the fall.
Oh, so we've got a number more years with you here. So you're definitely we're gonna see you quite a bit. I can see, and I see Dr. Wilson shaking her head. Okay, Claire, what year are you?
I'm a third year.
You're what?
I'm going into my third year.
In your third year, so you'll be a rising junior. Wonderful. We got 2 more years with you. Sarah, how about yourself?
I'm the same as Blair. I'm a junior.
Wonderful. And Mateo?
I'm a rising junior too.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we've got a couple more years of these great researchers here on campus. I'm sure faculty are like glad for that. It's always good to have a seasoned researchers on your team as you move forward. So this has been great. Thank you, Dr. Granger, and thank you, Clu, for putting all this together. And thank you, faculty, Dr. Davidson, Dr. Houston, Dr. De Silva, Dr. Lamb. Thank you so much for your work. I really do appreciate it. Really do very much, very much.
And thank you for your support too.
Oh, you're welcome. This is the fun part of the job. Are you kidding me? Every day, and I can see the happiness on your faces when you see the students. So thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Chancellor Brown. And I just want to say one more time that these students, they practiced for days on end to get to this point, to be able to present in a very unique format of Zoom. It is challenging to say the least, and they really rose to the occasion, and I couldn't be more proud of them. They represent this program just phenomenally.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate, even though we only were able to show you 4 of our SURP students, there are several others who were able to join in on the Zoom call. I appreciate their supporting their colleagues and the faculty members who were able to join us today too. This has been a great summer community. Just want to thank everyone for Zooming in today.
Thank you all. Thank you. Y'all be safe,
everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey.
Bye.
Bye.
Amazing. Am I on mute? No, I'm not on mute. That was fantastic. I'm so very proud of y'all. I'm very honored to have the privilege to work with each of you. So thank you so very much. Really, truly appreciate it.
Nice job.
Thanks for organizing everything, Clu, and for all of your hours spent working with the students. And it's a labor of love, I know.
It really is. It really is. And just to know that we have some more time with these students is phenomenal.
Yeah.
All right.
Sure.
Well, with that, then I'll close the proceedings and end the meeting.
Sounds good.
All right.